The village of Obodo was quiet at night. By the time the big moon rose, the streets were empty, and the only sounds were crickets chirping and the wind rustling the trees. But for Ayo, Efua, Chika, and Tunde, night was when the fun began. Their parents were always busy, too busy to notice that their children felt lonely. Ayo's father was a teacher who stayed late grading papers. Efua's mother was a nurse who worked night shifts. Chika's parents ran a big store at the market, and Tunde's father was a fisherman who left for the river before sunrise. One day, Ayo had an idea. "Let's meet at the old schoolyard when everyone is asleep," he whispered to his friends. "We can play games, tell stories, and have fun. No one will know." The others agreed. That night, when the village lights went out and the houses became dark, the four friends snuck out of their homes. They tiptoed past their parents' rooms, careful not to wake them. One by one, they met at the old schoolyard, a place no one visited anymore because it was said to be haunted. The schoolyard was surrounded by tall grass and had a big mango tree in the center. The moonlight made the broken windows of the classrooms look like watching eyes. "It's perfect," Efua said, her voice shaking a little. "Let's call it the Midnight Club." For the first few nights, they played hide and seek and told funny stories. They laughed so much that they forgot about how lonely they had been. But one night, as they were playing near the mango tree, Tunde stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The others froze. There was a faint rustling sound coming from the bushes. "It's just the wind," Chika said, trying to sound brave. But then they heard it again, a louder rustle, followed by what sounded like footsteps. "Maybe it's a goat," Ayo said, his eyes wide. "Let's check." The friends moved closer to the bushes, holding their breath. Suddenly, a dark shadow jumped out, and they screamed. But it wasn't a ghost or an animal. It was a boy around their age, with wild hair and torn clothes. He looked scared and dirty. "Who are you?" Efua asked, her voice shaking. "My name is Sei," the boy said. "Please don't tell anyone I'm here. I don't have anywhere else to go." The friends stared at each other. Who was this boy? Why was he hiding in the bushes? "You can stay with us," Ayo finally said, "but you have to promise to keep our midnight club a secret." Sei nodded. "I promise." From that night, Sei became part of the club. He was quiet and didn't talk much about himself, but he was good at climbing trees and finding hidden spots for their games. The friends began to wonder who he really was. One night, as they sat under the mango tree, Sei finally spoke. "I ran away from home," he said. "My uncle was very mean to me after my parents died. I couldn't stay there anymore." The friends felt sorry for him, but they didn't know that letting Sei into their club would change everything. A few nights later, strange things started happening. Chika noticed her school bag was missing. Efua said her mother's necklace, which she had hidden under her bed, was gone. "Do you think Sei took them?" Tunde asked, frowning. "No," Ayo said firmly. "He wouldn't do that. He's our friend." But the others weren't so sure. When they confronted Sei, he denied it. "I didn't take anything," he said, his eyes wide with fear. The Midnight Club began to feel different. Suspicion grew between the friends, and their laughter was replaced by uneasy silence. Then, one night, as they were walking back home, they saw something that made their blood run cold. A figure, dressed in black, was standing near the old school building. It wasn't moving, just staring at them. Who is that?" Efua stammered. The figure took a step forward, and the friends ran as fast as they could. When they reached the safety of their homes, they couldn't stop thinking about the figure in black. Was it connected to the missing items? Or was there something else going on in Obodo? None of them knew that the Midnight Club had awakened something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The next night, the friends weren't sure if they should meet again. Ayo was the first to suggest they stay home. "Maybe it's not safe anymore," he said, staring at the floor. "But what if Sei is in trouble?" Efua asked. "We can't leave him out there alone. Reluctantly, they agreed to go back to the schoolyard, but this time they each brought something for protection: sticks, stones, and even a small flashlight Chica had stolen from her father's toolbox. When they arrived, Say was already there, sitting under the mango tree. He looked pale and nervous. "You came back," he said quietly. "Of course we did," Tunde replied, though his voice lacked confidence. But before they could settle down, the air seemed to grow colder, and a soft humming sound came from the direction of the old school building. It was faint at first, like the buzzing of bees, but it grew louder with every passing second. "What is that?" Efua whispered, clutching her stick tightly. "I don't know," Say said, his eyes wide with fear. "But I've heard it before." The friends turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Ayo asked. Say hesitated, then said, "When I was living with my uncle, I used to hear that sound at night. It would always come from the forest behind his house. He told me never to go near it." "Did you?" Chica asked, her voice trembling. Say nodded. "Once, I followed the sound and I saw something. It wasn't human. It was dark with glowing red eyes. After that, I ran away and never looked back." The friends stared at him, horrified. "You mean that thing could be here now?" Tunde asked, looking around nervously. Before Say could answer, the humming sound stopped. Everything went silent. Too silent. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. Then, from the shadows of the old school building, a low growl echoed through the air. Ayo shone his flashlight toward the sound, and for a split second they saw it. A tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes, just like Say had described. It stood motionless, staring at them, before taking a slow step forward. "Run!" Ayo shouted, and the friends didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted through the tall grass, their hearts pounding in their chests. But the figure didn't chase them. It just stood there, watching as they disappeared into the night. When they finally reached Ayo's house, they were too scared to speak. Each of them was trembling, their minds racing with questions. What was that thing? Why was it at the schoolyard? And most importantly, what did it want with them? Say broke the silence. "It's my fault," he said, tears streaming down his face. "It must have followed me here." "No," Ayo said firmly, "we're in this together. We'll figure out what it is and how to stop it." "But how?" Efwa asked. "We don't even know what it is." Ayo thought for a moment. "There's only one person who might know," he said. "The village storyteller." The others gasped. The storyteller, Baba Leke, was an old man who lived at the edge of the village. He was known for his strange tales and riddles, but many people avoided him, saying he was cursed. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Chica asked nervously. "Do we have a choice?" Ayo replied. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, then nodded. Tomorrow night, they would visit Baba Leke, but none of them could shake the feeling that whatever they were dealing with was far more dangerous than they could imagine. And as the red-eyed figure watched them from the shadows, it let out a low, sinister laugh. The next day, the friends barely spoke to anyone. Each of them went about their chores, distracted and jumpy. The sight of the shadowy figure with glowing red eyes haunted their thoughts. By nightfall, they gathered near the edge of the village, where the path to Baba Leke's hut began. The moon was high, its silver light illuminating the narrow trail that snaked through the tall grass. "I don't think this is a good idea," Chica muttered, clutching the flashlight tightly. "We have to try," Ayo said, leading the way. The path to Baba Lek's hut was eerie, lined with thick trees that seemed to close in on them. Owls hooted in the distance, and every rustling leaf made them jump.
Finally, they reached the small, crooked hut. It was made of mud and straw, with a single wooden door that creaked open as if it had been expecting them. Smoke curled from a hole in the roof, carrying the scent of burning herbs. "Come in, children," a raspy voice called from inside. The friends exchanged nervous glances before stepping into the dimly lit room. Baba Lek sat cross-legged on a mat, his wrinkled face lit by the flickering flames of a small fire. Strings of beads and strange carvings hung from the walls. I know why you're here, he said without looking up. You do? Afua asked, her voice barely a whisper. Babalek nodded slowly. You've seen it, haven't you? The shadow with red eyes. How do you know about it? Tunda asked, his hands trembling. I've known about it for years, Babaleke replied. It is an ancient spirit, older than this village itself. It feeds on fear, growing stronger with every frightened heart it touches. What does it want with us? Ayo asked, his voice steady but his heart racing. Babaleke sighed deeply. It doesn't want you. It wants what you've created, the Midnight Club. Your secret meetings have awakened its interest. Spirits like this are drawn to places where children gather at night. It sees your laughter, your games, and your innocence as an invitation. The friends felt a chill run down their spines. How do we stop it? Chica asked. Babaleke leaned closer, his eyes glinting in the firelight. You cannot fight it with sticks or stones. The only way to defeat it is by facing your deepest fears. You must not let it see your terror, no matter what it shows you. But how do we do that? Say asked, his voice cracking. Babaleke reached into a woven basket and pulled out a small calabash filled with a dark, glowing liquid. Drink this when you see it again. It will connect your minds and give you strength. But be warned, it will also bring your fears to life. If you falter, it will consume you. The friends stared at the calabash, unsure if they could handle what Babalik was asking. Do we really have a choice? Ayo asked, looking at the others. No, Ifua said firmly, surprising even herself. We started this together. We have to end it together. Babalake handed the calabash to Ayo. Go now, before it grows too powerful to stop, and remember, courage is your only weapon. With heavy hearts, the friends left the hut and made their way back to the schoolyard. The air was colder than before, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. When they arrived, they stood beneath the mango tree, clutching the calabash tightly. The schoolyard was silent, but they knew the spirit was watching. Then, the humming sound returned. Low and menacing, it seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The red-eyed figure emerged from the darkness, taller and more menacing than before. This is it, Ayo whispered. Drink. One by one, they each took a sip from the calabash. The liquid was bitter and cold, but as it coursed through their veins, they felt a strange warmth and a sudden clarity. The spirit let out a low growl and raised a shadowy hand. The ground beneath them began to shift, and before their eyes, the schoolyard transformed. They were no longer standing under the mango tree. Instead, they found themselves in a twisted version of the schoolyard, where the grass was black, the sky was blood red, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. This is your fear, the spirit's voice boomed, echoing all around them. Show me your courage, or be mine forever. The friends gripped each other's hands tightly, their hearts pounding. They knew there was no turning back now. The twisted schoolyard seemed alive, its blackened grass writhing like snakes, and the blood-red sky swirling above. The air was heavy, thick with the sound of the spirit's laughter, deep and hollow. This is the place where courage and fear meet, the spirit growled. If you falter, you will be mine forever. The friends huddled together, clutching each other for support. Each felt the effects of Babaleke's potion coursing through them, sharpening their senses yet opening their minds to the terrifying visions ahead. What do we do now? Afua whispered, her voice trembling. Babaleke said we have to face our fears, Ayo replied. No matter what happens, we stay together. The spirit raised its shadowy arms, and suddenly the world around them began to shift. One by one, the friends found themselves separated, each trapped in a terrifying illusion of their deepest fear. Afua was the first. She found herself standing in her home, but it was dark, and her mother was nowhere to be seen. The house echoed with the sound of a baby crying, louder, then softer, then louder again. Afua's heart raced. "Mama!" she called out. But instead of her mother, a dark figure emerged, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. The figure extended the bundle toward her and Afua froze.
When the cloth unraveled, there was nothing inside but a gaping void. The spirit's voice boomed. "You fear being left alone, forgotten, unloved?" "No," Afua shouted, tears streaming down her face. "That's not true." But deep down, she knew it was. She had always feared her mother's long absences, worried that one day she would disappear forever. "Your fear feeds me?" the spirit sneered. Afua took a deep breath. Baba Leke's words echoed in her mind. "Courage is your only weapon." "I am not alone," she shouted. "I have my friends and I have my mother's love." The figure shrieked and dissolved into black mist. The crying stopped and Afua found herself back in the schoolyard. Meanwhile, Tunde stood on a boat in the middle of a stormy river. The water roared around him and the boat rocked violently. He clung to the edge, his knuckles white with fear. "Papa!" he shouted, but his father was nowhere to be seen. The river grew louder, and Tunde saw a massive wave rising ahead of him, ready to swallow the boat whole. "You fear failing your father," the spirit hissed, its voice carried on the wind. "You fear not being strong enough to carry his legacy." Tunde trembled. He had always admired his father, the brave fisherman, but he had never told anyone how much the pressure to live up to him scared him. As the wave loomed closer, Tunde stood tall. "I am not my father, but I am strong in my own way," he shouted. The wave crashed over the boat, but instead of drowning him, it vanished, leaving him standing back in the schoolyard. Chika found herself in her family's market store. It was completely empty, the shelves bare and the cash register broken. She looked around frantically. "Mama, Papa," she called, but there was no answer. Suddenly, shadows crept across the store, swallowing the walls and floors. A voice echoed around her. "You fear failure. You fear losing everything your family has built." Chika dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had always worked hard to make her parents proud, but deep down, she feared she wasn't good enough. The shadows crept closer, but Chika stood up. "I am more than my fears," she shouted. "I can build my own future." The shadows retreated, and she was back in the schoolyard. Io faced the spirit directly. He stood under the mango tree, but the branches were twisted and the leaves dripped with black ooze. "You fear being responsible for your friend's pain," the spirit said, its red eyes burning into him. "You fear that your decisions will destroy them." Io's heart pounded. It was true. He had led them to the Midnight Club, and now they were in danger because of him. "You should let them go," the spirit whispered. "Give them to me, and you will be free." Io clenched his fists. "No," he shouted. "We are stronger together. I will never abandon them." The spirit roared, its shadowy form growing taller, but Io held his ground. His courage burned brighter than his fear, and the spirit began to shrink. One by one, the friends returned to the schoolyard, standing together under the mango tree. The spirit growled, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You think you've won," it snarled. "I will return. Fear always returns." "Maybe," Io said, stepping forward, "but we'll be ready for you." The friends held hands, their combined courage forming a shield of light. The spirit let out a final, deafening scream before it dissolved into nothingness. The twisted schoolyard faded away, and they found themselves back under the real mango tree, the moon shining brightly above them. They sat in silence, breathing heavily, their hearts still racing. "We did it," Afua finally said, her voice shaking. "We faced it," Tunde added. "And we stayed together," Chika whispered. Sei, who had been silent, finally spoke. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to help me, but you did. I'll never forget this." Io smiled. "That's what the Midnight Club is for. We stick together no matter what." The friends knew their lives would never be the same. The spirit was gone, but the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. As the first rays of dawn lit the sky, they made a silent promise to each other. No matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together, with courage, friendship, and an unbreakable bond. The Midnight Club was more than a secret, it was their strength.